Madam Deputy Speaker, let me begin by welcoming, as so many of us have, the new Minister of State for the Middle East to his new position. When he fulfilled it in a more junior role, he fulfilled it with great distinction for a number of years, and I'm sure that he will do so again. And I'm sure that he will continue to bring the same passion that he always has to the cause of finding peace between Israel and Palestine, as he always does do to issues that he brings to this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, my pleasure of welcoming the new Minister of State to his new position and role is tempered by the fact that I do truly believe that if the government calls a debate on such a serious foreign policy issue as the future of talks between Israel and Palestine, the first time, I believe, for 10 years, then such a debate is also held in government time. And it would not be unreasonable to expect in those circumstances that the Foreign Secretary himself would make the effort to lead that discussion. Although, as I say, I don't mean to undermine how much I welcome the Minister and what it is that he said today, I do think that although some members might disagree, can I put it in this way? When Arthur Balfour, Britain's Foreign Secretary, decided 100 years ago that the British government should publicly declare its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people, he wrote the letter in his own name. He did not delegate the task to his junior ministers because Balfour realised that not only words matter, but who says them matters very much. And who is saying them does matter very much. So I regret that the Foreign Secretary had chosen not to speak today, and I'm afraid that it's all part of a pattern. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, since the Yom Kippur War in 1973, we have fought 12 elections in this country, and the party opposite has published 12 manifestos. And during the whole period, the election just gone is only the second time that the Tory party has failed to mention the Middle East even once in the whole of their manifesto. Even in the 2005 manifesto, a document so parochial, insular and isolationist that it didn't even mention Russia or the United States, even that manifesto at that time said, and I quote, "We will work to achieve peace in the Middle East based on the principle of Israel secure within its borders and a viable Palestinian state." 10 years later, in their 2015 manifesto, this is what the Conservative Party said: "We will support a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, robustly defending the right of Israel to protect its security, while continuing to condemn illegal settlement building, which undermines the prospects for peace." So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to ask ourselves, what has changed? Why has the party opposite been prepared to spell out their Middle East policy in 1987, 1992, 1997, 2001, 2005, 2010, and just 2 years ago in 2015? Why was it prepared to do that on all of those occasions, but the latest manifesto says absolutely nothing? Or as some might say, in a moment, but as some might say, klum, or some might say, lasjay. I don't know what the Foreign Secretary's explanation for this is, and we're not going to find out today. It might be that he might blame Nick Timothy or his good friend Sir Linton Crosby, but I've got to say that I drafted my section of Labour's manifesto, so why did the Foreign Secretary trust someone else to do it?
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Foreign Secretary for giving way. It may be the case that Conservatives didn't cover this issue in our manifesto, but at least we didn't elect a leader who views Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends.
I think it's important when debating this matter to debate it seriously and to raise serious matters before us. And I'm surprised at the tone that the Honourable Lady introduces. I have to say that if she wants to continue to use the Linton Crosby style of politics in this place, I have to say that it is discredited, outdated, and doesn't work. And surely it's better to actually engage on the substance of this. And the point that I am making today is that the Conservative Party at the last general election did not mention the Middle East, did not mention Palestine and Israel, and I'm coming on in my speech to wonder why that is and to put forward a few explanations. Yes, I will.
The Shadow Foreign Secretary is very dismissive of her leader's description of Hamas and Hezbollah as friends. I have to say to her, a great deal of my constituents, many of whom are Jewish, are deeply worried and troubled by the prospect that someone that aspires to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom should describe those two Jew-hating terrorist organisations as his friends. And I would welcome the opportunity for the Shadow Foreign Secretary to withdraw on behalf of the Labour Party those comments have caused so much upset and offence in the community.
I think that one way that we could approach this is by looking at the truth of the situation, which is that the leader of my party wishes to, in order to engage people in peace, to bring people together and to try to get them to discuss matters, because it is only through discussion and it is only through agreement that one can get pace and that one can get progress. And if it's, let me just finish the point that I'm making before the honourable gentleman jumps up and down. Please, if we would just calm down a little. So the point that I'm making is this: I'm sure that if the honourable gentleman has some good ideas in terms of what the future of a peace process in Israel and Palestine might look like, it may be that he will get a letter from the leader of the opposition asking him up to the second floor of Norman Shaw South, and he can discuss it with him. He is quite happy to discuss the issue of peace and ideas that people have, and for there to be, as I say, for it to be one of the main guns of the Linton Crosby campaign, which is discredited and has not worked, and to hear it continuing to be used, I'm afraid I'm not going to take any further interventions from this side of the House if it's simply all that Linton Crosby can write. And I'll take an intervention.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she has rightly talked about the seriousness of the issue, and really our focus must urgently be on those who are living in Israel and Palestine and those who are tremendously suffering. I think what is important to acknowledge in this debate as well is the humanitarian situation and how that has worsened. 2 million people are trapped in the Gaza Strip, half of them children. In 2012, the UN said that Gaza would be unlivable by 2020. Many experts say that 2020 is already here. Do you not agree with me that does she not agree with me, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it is important that we focus on those real issues and that we move forward some of the debate productively in this House today?
I think that the honourable lady is quite right. When 80% of people who live in Gaza are dependent on aid in order to survive, I think that it is a very important issue, and my honourable friend who will be summing up this debate at the end of the day will be dealing particularly on humanitarian issues. So if I can go back to the point that I was making, and I'll make a little more progress. Whilst perhaps messages are sent out to Linton Crosby for a different script than the ones that we've had so far. So I've got to say that I drafted my section of the Labour manifesto. So why did the Foreign Secretary trust someone else to draft his? The reason I would suggest is this, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we have always known in this country, ever since the Balfour Declaration 100 years ago, that when statesmen and stateswomen in this country are prepared to set down in black and white their policies on the Middle East, those words have an impact. And when they are set out by the most senior figures, an official government policy, they matter even more. And my fear, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that when the Conservative Party fails to set out its policies in respect to the Middle East, despite the very important things that the honourable gentleman has said today, the point is that if it's not put out in the manifesto, if it's not said by the Secretary of State, it does not have the same impact. And that is important, because when the Conservative Party fails to set out its policies in respect to the Middle East in its official manifesto, people on all sides of that debate, particularly people in Palestine and Israel themselves, are left to interpret the silence the way they wish. And many of them, sadly, will come to the conclusion that I did. I fear that the government could not repeat its 2015 language supporting a two-state solution in a moment. They could not repeat their language condemning illegal settlement building, because on both those points they do not know as yet where Donald Trump stands. And until they do, they want nothing written in black and white, because one day it might put them at odds with the American president. And that simply isn't good enough. We cannot overturn decades of established British foreign policy upheld by successive governments from both parties just because this pathetic government is happy to play patsy to Donald Trump.
Very, very grateful for finally the Shadow Foreign Secretary to give way. But I can assure her that if her right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, if he has anything to say about Israel-Hamas, he can do it when he visits my constituency of Hendon tomorrow, where I have the second largest Jewish community in the country, and I'm sure they have plenty of questions to ask him. But what I want to know from the Shadow Foreign Secretary, which has been made very clear today, is, as according to her manifesto, which she wrote, that you will recognise the state of Palestine immediately. Yes or no?
If the honourable gentleman will take his seat, relax, listen to the rest of my speech. I'm getting to that at the later stage of my speech.
Honourable friend, give way.
Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Only about 2 or 3 years ago, when we had the coalition government, and this might explain the reason why it's not in the Conservative manifesto, the then Foreign Secretary said that the window of opportunity for a settlement was slowly vanishing. Would you not agree with me that this possibly is the reason that the government parties possibly never really given up? Because the minister concerned, when I asked him the question about discussions with the Israeli government about sanctions and the settlements, he referred to, he said he'd answer later on, which he didn't completely answer. But more importantly, there is, as my honourable friend has said, 2 million people suffering in Palestine. What is the government going to do about elevating that suffering in relation to sanctions?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and I know that the Minister is making a note of it, and hopefully he will deal with it at the end of this debate, because I think that the questions that are being asked are important ones. I mean, let us try to seek some clarity from the Minister of State today on where the government stands and what they are going to do to promote peace, what they are going to do to promote peace in any of these specific areas that we on this side have set out in our manifesto. First of all, on the issue of security, we said there can be no military solution to this conflict, and all sides must avoid taking action that would make peace harder to achieve. That is what we wrote in May, and surely no party in this House would disagree. We all know that there can be no progress towards peace between Israel and Palestine unless both sides are sure of their security. But sadly, the reality is that at present, the opposite is true. Peace and security are becoming ever harder to achieve because of the climate of increasing aggression and extremism, and the honourable gentleman has referred to that. Whether it is the horrific phenomenon of Palestinians attacking random Israeli civilians and security staff with knives, or ramming them with vehicles, leaving dozens dead and injured, and creating a dread that we in this country well understand now, particularly after the attack on London Bridge, or whether it is those acts of indiscriminate terror, or the record number of Palestinians who last year were forcibly, without process or explanation, were evicted from their homes in the occupied territories, and in many cases to make way for new and illegal Israeli settlements. Whatever the actions taken, no matter which is objectively worse, no matter who started it first, and no matter what ludicrous justifications anyone can offer, the truth is that all of these actions are simply contributing to and worsening the same vicious cycle of violence and extremism, a vicious cycle that can never lead us towards peace. I will take it.
Very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. Will she agree with me that one thing that can unite us across party in this House is in addition to our opposition to terrorism, which we must also always condemn, we must also be united in our opposition to flagrant breaches of international law and flagrant human rights abuses in the occupied Palestinian territory?
The Honourable Lady is, of course, quite right. May I take another intervention?
I'm grateful to my friend. And in connection with this issue of settlements, I mean, yes, it's right, of course, that we condemn settlements, but if international law is powerless to impose any form of sanction, are we not simply cementing the status quo, and the status quo that's not delivered peace over the last many decades?
I believe that all of us have been saying for some time that we know what a peace settlement ought to look like. We know that there are elements, that we know what elements need to be stopped. We know that we have to stop the downward spiral of illegality, of violence, of blaming one another. And the further down we go, the more difficult it is to climb out again. Which is why what I would like to do in this speech is to address what it is that the British can do. Because as a friend of Israel and of Palestine, I'm appalled at this cycle of violence, which has become so familiar that it's no longer covered by our country's news broadcasts, let alone in some parties' manifestos. And I'm equally appalled when the reaction of some on both sides of this debate is not to prioritise stopping this cycle of violence, but instead believing that somehow we have to pick a side and pick a side to support, denying the reality that in a terrible conflict such as this, no side can win, but only sides can continue, certainly, to lose. So let me ask the Minister of State, what is his government doing to bring the cycle of violence to an end? Let me ask him in particular, what steps is he putting on Palestinian leaders to end and condemn all the acts of terrorist violence against Israel, whether using knives, vehicles or rockets, to end and condemn all incitement to violence, including their own, and at long last to recognise the State of Israel's right to exist. But let me also ask him what pressure he's bringing on the Israeli government to end the forced displacement of Palestinians from their homes, to end the building of new settlements, and commit to the dismantling of existing ones. Ultimately, what are they doing to end the blockade of the occupied territories and allow the Palestinian people to find permanent homes and proper jobs? And while we're discussing the issue of security, it would be remiss, Madam Deputy Speaker, for me not to ask the Minister this. When can we expect the publication of the report into the foreign funding of extremist groups in the UK? We all know that this is a central issue when it comes to Israel and Palestine. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, the funding network for Hamas and other extremist groups is vital. We need to look into this and we need to understand it. And yet, this is what the Foreign Secretary said when he was asked about the report on the 6th of June. He said, and I quote, "I'll dig it out," he said, "and I'll have a look at it, if that's what you would like me to do." Well, we don't want him to dig it out. It should never have been buried in the first place. We want the government to publish it and we want them to act on it. And we want to know, indeed we have a right to know, how their policy towards Qatar and their policy towards Saudi Arabia and their policy toward other countries that may be funding extremism is being informed by that report. And we want to know, and we can see no reason why we shouldn't be told. So can the Minister start by telling us today, what countries does that report implicate? Are they sovereign governments to blame, or simply private wealthy financiers? What are the government's ties with those governments, and what are the government's ties with those individuals? And ultimately, why hasn't that report been published? Let me turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the importance of clarity and, frankly, consistency too, amongst other things in relation to the Middle East. Labour, once more, in our manifesto, we call for a two-state solution, we call for an end of illegal settlements, and we call for a return to meaningful negotiations to achieve a diplomatic resolution. None of those things should be difficult or controversial. Indeed, they have been staples of UK government policy and successive party manifestos on both sides, going back to the aftermath of the Second World War. But, as I have already said, we are now at a crossroads, it seems to me, where the government does not know whether Britain's long-standing policies in the Middle East are still consistent with our equally strong desire to work closely with the United States to try to coordinate policy, because we don't know what the United States policy is. Now, I hear the Honourable Gentleman welcoming President Trump's engagement on this issue, but I note that whilst he welcomes his engagement, he doesn't give us any indication of what it is that Donald Trump's policy in relation to the Middle East is. Because and that confusion is not restricted to Britain. 2 weeks ago, we had an Israeli defence minister who suggested that there is an agreed level of new settlement construction which the Trump administration had said that they will support. And the minister said, and I quote, "They respect our approach and our vision regarding settlements." But last week, we had the Israeli education minister saying the opposite. The Trump approach to settlement building was a disappointment. He's going down the same unsuccessful path as his predecessors, he said. So what's the truth? The Israelis don't know, the Palestinians don't know, and I have to say, I bet a fair amount that the Minister of State, although he welcomes the engagement, he really doesn't know what Donald Trump's policy is. And depressingly, the point is this: I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump hasn't got the foggiest idea either.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. I was on a delegation, cross-party delegation in January to the Holy Land,
And does she share the concern that some of the Palestinians we saw there, Christians as well as Muslims, are concerned that Donald Trump's involvement, some of his acolytes, in settlement construction, their financial sort of interests in there. And also, the popular imagination of settlements is maybe a few shacks on a hill, but ones as Mal al-Dumim, which we saw, there's 37,500 people there. It looks like a very pleasant American commuter town with 5 swimming pools and all sorts of... And that helps make the geographically viable Palestinian state, which might one day come, even more difficult.
I mean, the difficulty is that certainly during the campaign and in the early days of his I think the word is administration, the statements that he has made in relation to Israel have been very alarming for those who are in support of a two-state solution, and that is the truth. So, where Donald Trump is going, but the point I'm trying to make is that since Britain has always wanted to be able to coordinate our foreign policy with the Americans, and this particular government is so weak and wobbly that they feel that they have to be in lockstep with Donald Trump, that is where we have the difficulty in relation to Middle East policy, and that, I would suggest, may be one of the reasons why the Foreign Secretary won't come to this dispatch box, and why it is that the Israel and Palestine are not mentioned in the manifesto. But can I develop my argument further? So one thing we know for sure, that waiting for Donald Trump to make up his mind is no way for the British government to decide its foreign policy. So let me ask the Minister of State today, not just to do what every foreign minister has done for the last 7 decades and make clear that we want to see peaceful process of negotiation towards a two-state solution, including an end of all acts of terrorism towards Israel and an end to all illegal settlements, but let me ask him to also make it clear that that will be our position regardless of where America finally decides its policy stance is. Because if Donald Trump departs from these long-standing policies, what I want to know today, Madam Deputy Speaker, is will the British government condemn him for that? Because that is what they should be prepared to do. Because if they are undermining the chances for peace, then and if the Minister of State will not say those things today, then we can only come to 2 equally unpalatable and pitiful conclusions. Either this government has abdicated Britain's leadership role and that they're simply waiting to take their cues from Trump Tower, or that this government sees no point in putting pressure on the Trump administration because they know that they'll simply be ignored, just like they were over climate change. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn to the final points on this issue. In the Labour manifesto, in which we said simply and clearly a Labour government will immediately recognise the state of Palestine, 6 years ago the then Foreign Secretary said, "We reserve the right to recognise a Palestinian state at a moment of our choosing and when it can best help bring about peace." Let me then urge the Minister and the Government to seize the moment that we are now offered by the Balfour Centenary, to throw our support behind Palestinian statehood, just as we did 100 years ago behind Israeli statehood. And if the question is, is this the moment when recognising statehood will help bring about peace? And I would simply ask, in Primo Levi's words, if not now, when? Because when violence and extremism is rising on all sides, when hardliners are assuming increasing control, when the humanitarian crisis is getting even worse, and when all eyes are on an American president whose grand plan for peace exists only in his mind, then that is when, more than ever, we need the British government to show some leadership and show the way towards peace, and recognition of Palestinian statehood would be one significant step in that direction. So will the Minister of State tell the House whether such a move is under consideration, and if not, what will it take for the government to act? I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman will recall that in 2014, MPs from all sides of the House voted in favour of recognition of Palestine by a majority of 262. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have mentioned today the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. Yes, of course I will.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for giving way, and I'm interested in listening with great care to what she's saying about recognition of Palestine, and in particular what the government's position was some years ago. Does she sort of share my concern that it seemed like from the Minister's comments today that actually that position has moved and it is being something that is ruled out until the end of talks in a peace process, rather than something that the government would be able to do at any time?
I mean, I would be grateful if the Minister could perhaps clarify the position today, and that's why I'm asking the questions, because it does seem to me that it is an opportunity for Britain to play honest broker if we were to recognise the Palestinian state, and also to put the challenge down to Palestinians to ensure that people do behave in a statesperson-like way in order to look to the future and to behave in a way that the Palestinians need to have their leaders behave if they are to be a state. And if we were to recognise that, it does seem to me that that would be a positive contribution that we could make. So I was talking about the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, but this is also the year when we mark 50th anniversaries of two equally significant moments in Middle Eastern history, the Six-Day War and the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. And just as the consequences of Balfour's letter are still with us 100 years on, the consequences of events in 1967 are equally alive today. They are alive in the justifiable fears that every Israeli citizen shares whenever they hear denials of Israel's right to exist, whenever they hear air sirens warning of rocket attacks, and whenever they hear the latest reports of cowardly terror attacks on ordinary Israeli citizens. But the consequences are also with us in the anger and unfairness felt by many Palestinian people since 1967, their children growing up in poverty and deprivation, their homes bulldozed to make way for ever more illegal settlements, and their futures offering just more of the same. It is a vicious cycle of fear and despair, a downward spiral, as I said earlier, a downward spiral from which it becomes ever harder to climb back. But it doesn't have to be this way. We will hear in today's debate, indeed we have all heard in our discussions with Israelis and Palestinians in recent years, that there are people on all sides of goodwill, with moderate views, with mutual understanding, and with shared hope for progress, that can together take us down the long and difficult but necessary path towards brokering a lasting peace. And I hope that the debate today will set the right tone in that regard. And I hope that it will be constructive, and I hope that it will be forward-looking. And most of all, as I said at the outset, I hope that we all remember that our words on these issues are listened to, they matter and they make a difference, and that neither choosing silence nor choosing sides is an acceptable option. If what we ultimately want is peace, so in that spirit, I would ask the Minister of State to address all the questions that I have raised, and most importantly, to tell us very simply what is the government actively doing on its own terms in the coming months to make its contributions towards that peace.